The clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of laughter filled the golden hall of Le Jardin Rouge, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. It was the kind of place where hedge fund managers sealed deals over vintage Bordeaux, and celebrities slipped in through back doors to avoid the paparazzi. For Harper Collins, though, it was just another long shift. She balanced a silver tray on her palm, weaving between tables with the grace of someone who had learned to move like smoke, present but unnoticed. She wore the crisp black blouse and apron every server here wore, her blonde hair tied back in a simple bun. But beneath her composed surface, there was a weight pressing on her chest, the kind that never went away. Her grandfather's watch. It was more than just an object. It was the last piece of him she had, a pocket watch with a brass casing, engraved initials, and a faint crack along the glass face. When he died, it had gone missing, lost in the shuffle of unpaid debts and pawned shop slips. For years, Harper had carried the ache of that loss like a ghost in her pocket. She thought about it often, but tonight it hit her sharper than usual. Maybe it was the chandeliers, dripping with light like molten gold. Maybe it was the way the wealthy dined here, as though the world belonged to them. Whatever it was, she felt her throat tighten as she placed a bottle of Chateau Margaux on table 12. And then she saw it. Her tray nearly slipped from her hand. Sitting at the head of a corner table, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns, was Lincoln Davis, billionaire, tech mogul, a man whose face was plastered on magazine covers, hailed as a visionary of the new age. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting casually on the table, the other holding a glass of red wine. And there, dangling from a gold chain attached to his vest pocket, was a watch. Her grandfather's watch. Harper's heart skipped a beat. The brass casing, the crack on the glass, the initials carved into the side, it was unmistakable. The world seemed to tilt, the music from the pianist by the bar fading into a dull roar in her ears. She froze mid-step, staring. Lincoln's girlfriend, Sienna Moore, sat beside him. She was all glossy hair and designer silk, laughing a little too loudly, stroking his arm as though she owned him. Harper recognized her instantly, an influencer who thrived on scandals, her face a permanent fixture on gossip sites. "Harper, table 9, whispered a coworker, nudging her as he passed. She blinked, forcing herself to move again, her steps shaky. She placed the bottle down on the next table and excused herself politely, but her eyes kept darting back to Lincoln. No, it can't be, but it is. She couldn't look away. The memory surged forward, her grandfather's rough hands, pressing the watch into her father's palm years ago. This is more than just time, son, he had said. It's a reminder that every second counts. Keep it safe. And then later, her father giving it to her on the porch of their old house, the setting sun casting everything gold. It had been their family's most precious heirloom, and now it was swinging from the vest of a billionaire who probably didn't even know or care what it meant. Harper's throat burned. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The rage was raw, tangled with grief. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick with injustice. Across the room, Lincoln glanced at her. Their eyes met only for a second. His were sharp, calculating, the eyes of a man used to sizing up everyone around him. To him, she was just another server, disposable, forgettable. But Harper didn't look away. For the first time in her life, she didn't shrink back. Sienna followed his gaze, her perfectly lined lips curling in amusement when she noticed Harper staring at the watch. She leaned in and whispered something in Lincoln's ear. He smirked, swirling his wine glass as though this were all some private joke. Harper's hands shook. The tray rattled. She set it down quickly on a side station, gripping the edge to steady herself. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, her vision blurring with angry tears. She had no plan, no power, no voice in this room, but she had something that couldn't be bought, the truth. Her coworker passed by again, whispering, "You okay? You look pale." I'm fine, Harper said, though her voice trembled. She wasn't fine. She was on fire inside. The watch glinted in the chandelier's glow, taunting her. And then, almost without realizing it, Harper found her feet carrying her forward. Step by step, across the polished floor, past the tables of Manhattan's elite, until she was standing at Lincoln Davis's table. The conversation around him lulled as diners noticed the young waitress standing there, her hands clenched at her sides, her eyes locked on the billionaire. Lincoln raised a brow. "Something wrong, miss." His tone was smooth, dismissive, the way you'd speak to someone below you. Harper's voice wavered at first, but then it steadied. She pointed to the chain. "That watch, it belonged to my grandfather." The entire table went silent. Sienna burst out laughing, the sound sharp as glass. "Are you serious? You think this?" She flicked the chain with her manicured nail. "Belonged to you." Lincoln smirked, sipping his wine. "Bold claim," he said, "but I think you're mistaken." Harper's face flushed, but she held her ground. "I know that watch. Every scratch, every mark, it's ours, my family's." Gasps rippled from nearby tables. Guests began whispering, pulling out their phones, intrigued by the unfolding drama. Lincoln leaned back, amused. "Interesting. And what exactly do you plan to do about it?" Harper's hands trembled, but her voice didn't falter. "I want it back." The billionaire's smile widened, slow and cruel. He tilted the watch toward the light, letting it gleam like a trophy. "Pretty little thing, isn't it? Shame it's wasted on the wrong people." Sienna giggled, her eyes sparkling with mockery. "A waitress and her fairy tale," she sneered. The tension in the restaurant thickened, pressing down like a storm about to break. The pianist stopped playing. Even the waitstaff froze, waiting. Harper felt her chest tighten, but she refused to back down. She had nothing left to lose. Lincoln swirled his wine again, eyes glinting. "Careful, sweetheart. You don't want to play games you can't win." The room buzzed with whispers, phones raised discreetly. The story was spreading already. And Harper, her voice raw with pain, said the words that made every head turn. "I'm not playing a game. I'm fighting for what's mine." The air crackled with shock. And as Lincoln's smirk deepened, as if he had just found a new way to crush her, Harper realized she had stepped into a battle far bigger than herself. The air inside the restaurant vibrated with tension. Every eye was on Lincoln, waiting to see how he would respond to Harper's defiance. For the first time that night, the billionaire's smirk curved into something darker, something dangerous. And as Harper stood trembling but unyielding, she realized this battle was only beginning, one that would drag her deeper than she ever imagined. The silence stretched across the restaurant, heavy and suffocating. Harper stood trembling, her chest rising and falling in sharp breaths, while every pair of eyes in the Jardin Rouge locked on her. She had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the city. Lincoln Davis leaned back in his chair, utterly calm, as if none of this mattered. His lips curved into the kind of smile that wasn't warmth but arrogance, a smile that told the world he was untouchable. "Your grandfather's watch, you say," he drawled, rolling the chain between his fingers. "That's quite the accusation to make in a place like this." The guests at nearby tables gasped, whispering behind champagne glasses. Phones hovered just low enough to avoid staff interference, recording every second. The atmosphere had shifted. Dinner was over. This was entertainment. Sienna Moore, still draped across Lincoln's arm, let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, this is rich. A waitress with family heirlooms." She tilted her head, her eyes scanning Harper's simple uniform with disdain. "Honey, you probably couldn't afford the keychain this watch hangs on." The words sliced through Harper like knives. Her face burned, but she clenched her fists, fighting back the sting of humiliation. "I know that watch," Harper said, louder this time, her voice carrying across the hushed dining room. "It has my grandfather's initials engraved inside the casing. J.C. James Collins. That's his name. And it's mine." Gasps echoed. Even the waiters had stopped moving, frozen like statues. Lincoln's smile didn't falter. Instead, he flicked open the cover of the pocket watch with a soft click. The golden casing gleamed beneath the chandeliers. He examined it lazily, as though indulging her, then turned it toward the light. "Well," he murmured, "would you look at that? There are initials." He paused, raising the watch so the diners could see. The faint engraving glinted under the glow, JC. Harper's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes welled, proof it was real. But Lincoln wasn't finished. He snapped the watch shut with a cruel smile. "Of course, it doesn't mean anything. JC could be anyone, John Carter, Joseph Campbell, Jessica Clark," he shrugged. "Pretty common initials. You'd be surprised how many watches have them." The crowd chuckled, some nervously, some in open mockery. Sienna leaned closer to Lincoln, pressing her lips against his ear before speaking loud enough for Harper to hear. She probably saw it on eBay once and thought she could pull a sob story. Laughter rippled. Harper's throat closed up. Her pulse hammered. Her truth was unraveling into a spectacle, her pain reduced to a punchline for Manhattan's elite. "You don't understand," Harper said desperately, her voice breaking. "That watch was the only thing my grandfather left behind. He carried it every day of his life. He promised it would stay in the family. When he died, it went missing. And now here it is on you." Her words cracked with grief, raw and unfiltered. For a fleeting moment, the crowd's laughter faltered. A few faces softened with something like pity. But Lincoln's eyes glinted like steel. "That's a touching story," he said smoothly. "But stories don't make ownership. Money does." He tucked the watch back into his vest pocket. "And I bought this fair and square." Sienna smirked. "See, darling, poor girl just wants attention. It's pathetic, really." She tilted her head at Harper. "You should know your place. Bringing drama into this restaurant, it's embarrassing." The words landed like a slap. Harper's cheeks flushed crimson, but the fire inside her wouldn't die. She refused to bow, not now. "My place," she whispered, trembling with fury. Then louder, her voice echoing through the restaurant. "My place is fighting for what's mine." A murmur swept across the room. Some diners clapped softly, as though watching a play. Others shook their heads, muttering about waitresses chasing headlines. Lincoln leaned forward, his expression darkening. "You're making a mistake, sweetheart. People who step into my world don't usually walk away unscathed." The warning sent a chill down Harper's spine, but she stood her ground. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Every second counts, Harper. Don't waste them being silent." Her lips trembled, but she lifted her chin. "You can threaten me all you want, but you can't erase the truth. That watch belongs to my family." Sienna snorted. "And what's your grand plan, sweetheart? Sue him. With what lawyer, with what money? You'll never win. You're nothing but a waitress." The words stung like acid, drawing laughter from several tables. Tears pricked Harper's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She swallowed the pain, gripping it like a weapon. Across the room, Ethan Brooks, a journalist for the Manhattan Ledger, adjusted his glasses as he watched intently. His phone camera was recording, capturing every humiliating word. He had seen Lincoln crush people before, but there was something different about this girl. Something fierce, even in her trembling. Lincoln drained the last of his wine and stood slowly, towering over Harper. His presence swallowed the space, commanding silence. He leaned close, his voice low and venomous. "You have no power here. You're a fly buzzing around my table, and flies get swatted." He slipped $100 bill from his wallet and tossed it onto her tray. The bill landed like an insult, curling on the silver surface. "Now run along," he said coldly, "before you regret this little performance." The humiliation hit Harper like a punch to the gut. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the tray. The laughter rose again, echoing through the restaurant, wrapping around her like chains. Her vision blurred, her chest tight. She wanted to scream, to rip the watch from his pocket, to claw back the last piece of her family. But her body betrayed her, frozen, trembling, suffocating under the weight of every mocking stare. For the first time, she thought she might break. And then, just as the despair threatened to swallow her whole, a voice rang out. Enough. Every head turned. Ethan Brooks stood from his table, phone still in hand, his jaw set. He wasn't smiling, and his eyes burned with quiet defiance. Lincoln frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. And who the hell are you? Ethan's voice was steady, cutting through the noise. Someone who knows the truth doesn't stay hidden forever. Gasps rippled. The cameras swiveled. For the first time all night, Harper felt a flicker of hope. The ballroom had become a theater, every guest leaning forward, savoring the spectacle. Lincoln's smirk grew wider, feeding off the crowd's laughter, while Harper's trembling hands betrayed the storm raging inside her. She had spoken her truth, but it felt like her words were swallowed whole by the room, twisted into entertainment for the wealthy. For a moment, she thought she might break right there, collapsing under the weight of mockery and humiliation. And then from somewhere beyond the glittering tables, a new voice cut through the noise. Strong, steady, unshaken. A voice that didn't mock, didn't laugh, but carried a sharp edge of defiance. Every head turned, every camera swiveled. Harper's breath caught in her chest, because in that instant she understood. She wasn't as alone as she thought. The tide of her story was about to change. The air inside Le Jardin Rouge had thickened into something electric, a cocktail of cruelty, curiosity, and voyeurism. Every patron seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what the waitress would do next, as if Harper's pain were part of the evening's entertainment. Lincoln Davis still stood above her, the watch glinting from his vest pocket like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. His towering frame radiated power. Beside him, Sienna Moore lounged in her chair like a queen overseeing a court jester's humiliation. Her laugh shattered the silence. "Look at her," she said loudly enough for the entire dining room to hear. "She actually believes she deserves something like this. Sweetheart, you should be grateful people like us even let you serve our table." The room erupted in nervous chuckles. Some diners exchanged glances that said this is too much, but no one intervened. Most simply lifted their glasses and leaned in closer, unwilling to miss a single detail. Harper's throat tightened. Her hands trembled at her sides. She could feel hundreds of eyes piercing into her, dissecting her pain. The tray with the $100 bill still lay on the counter beside her, mocking her. Her grandfather's words echoed faintly in her head, "Every second counts." But right now, every second felt like a weight pressing her deeper into the ground. "Tell you what," Sienna continued, her voice coated in honeyed venom, "why don't you shine it for him? You're good with polish, right?" She giggled, brushing Lincoln's shoulder. The laughter that followed hit Harper harder than any slap. Her cheeks burned hot. A lump rose in her throat. She bit the inside of her cheek, desperate to stop the tears from falling. But one slipped free anyway, glistening under the chandelier before sliding down her cheek. A murmur rippled through the room, some pity, mostly ridicule. The sight of a waitress crying in front of a billionaire was almost too delicious for them to ignore. Lincoln noticed. His smirk deepened. He thrived on this imbalance, the rich towering over the poor, dignity stripped away piece by piece. He leaned closer and whispered just loud enough for Harper to hear, "Pathetic. You'll never have it back. It belongs to me now, just like everything else I take." Her stomach twisted, nausea rolling through her. She felt small, invisible, broken. But somewhere deep inside, a different flame flickered. She remembered the porch swing where her father had pressed the watch into her hands. The way he had said, "This is more than just a timepiece. It's proof of who we are, where we come from. Guard it with your life." But she had failed then, and now it was dangling in front of her like bait, mocking everything her family ever stood for. Her voice cracked as she spoke, trembling but defiant. "You can laugh all you want. That watch is still mine, and one day everyone will know it." Sienna rolled her eyes dramatically. God, she's relentless. Then, turning to the audience of diners, she announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, witness the tragedy of a delusional waitress. Should we pass around a donation jar? Maybe she can buy herself a knockoff on Canal Street." The laughter was louder this time, sharper, a wave that crashed over Harper's breaking heart. She staggered back a step, her vision blurring. Humiliation cut deeper than any wound. It wasn't just the billionaire's cruelty or the mistress's mockery. It was the indifference of everyone else. The way people recorded her breakdown instead of helping. The way their smirks fed on her tears. She wanted to run, to disappear, to crawl into the shadows and never return. But she stood there, shaking, refusing to give Lincoln the satisfaction of watching her flee. From the corner, Ethan Brooks tightened his grip on his phone. His camera had captured everything. Sienna's taunts, Lincoln's threats, Harper's anguish. His jaw clenched. He had seen power used to crush the powerless before, but this felt different. This wasn't just another exposé. This was personal. Lincoln reached into his pocket again, pulled out another 100, and flicked it toward Harper like a scrap tossed to a dog. The bill fluttered down and landed at her feet. "Clean yourself up," he sneered. "You're ruining the atmosphere." The diners roared with laughter. Someone even clapped. Harper stared at the bill on the floor. Her chest heaved, her fists clenched so tightly her nails dug crescents into her palms. She whispered under her breath, too soft for most to hear but loud enough for herself, "I will not break." With trembling hands, she bent down, not for the bill but for the tray she had abandoned. She lifted it, balanced it with dignity, and forced her spine straight. Her face still burned with shame, but her eyes carried something new, resolve. As she turned to leave the table, Sienna called after her, "Don't forget to smile, sweetheart. Tips are better when you look grateful." The room howled with laughter again. Harper didn't look back. She walked toward the kitchen, every step heavier than the last, but every step also a vow. She would not let this end here. Inside the staff hallway, she collapsed against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the cold tile floor. Her chest heaved with silent sobs. She pressed her fists to her eyes, fighting the tidal wave of despair. For the first time in years, she felt the hollow ache of her grandfather's absence. He would have known what to do. He would have told her not to give up. But all she had now was emptiness and the echo of mocking laughter. Still beneath the pain, the flame flickered again. Quiet, stubborn, alive. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She pulled it out, hands shaking. A text from her landlord lit up the screen, "Rent due tomorrow. No extensions." Her tears blurred the words. The humiliation of the night merged with the crushing weight of her real life. Fired, mocked, broke, and powerless. But then through the blur she noticed another message. Unknown number. "You don't deserve this. Meet me after your shift. I have something you need to see." Her breath caught. She glanced toward the dining room, where Ethan Brooks sat at his table, phone in hand. His eyes locked on hers with a silent promise. For the first time that night, Harper felt a sliver of hope pierce the darkness. Harper pressed her back against the cold kitchen wall, her body shaking with silent sobs. The echoes of laughter from the dining hall still clung to her, sharp as broken glass. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her grandfather's absence crushing her, the hollow reminder that she was utterly alone. But then, through the haze of despair, her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen, just a few words, but enough to cut through the darkness. "You don't deserve this. Meet me after your shift. I have something you need to see." Harper wiped at her tears, staring at the message. Someone out there had been watching. Someone knew the truth. And for the first time that night, the faintest spark of hope flickered through the pain. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning to unfold. The night at Le Jardin Rouge dragged on like a wound that refused to close. Harper's shift ended after midnight. By then, most of the diners had drifted away into limousines and private cars, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume, spilled champagne, and the echo of cruel laughter. She stepped out into the alley behind the restaurant, the air thick with summer humidity. The city hummed as it always did, taxi horns blaring, neon signs flickering, laughter spilling out of bars. But for Harper, the world felt muted, muffled by the weight of humiliation pressing against her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring down at the cracked pavement. Her phone buzzed again, the same number. "You don't deserve what happened tonight. Meet me, corner of 54th and Madison." Her stomach knotted. Every instinct screamed caution. She didn't know who this was, but the thought of going home, empty, ashamed, and powerless, felt unbearable. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and started walking. By the time she reached the corner, the city had thinned into the quiet hours. Streetlights glowed amber against the slick asphalt. A man stood under one of them, leaning casually against a lamppost. He wasn't dressed like the patrons from earlier. No tux, no silk tie. Just a gray blazer, rolled-up sleeves, dark jeans, and a notebook tucked under his arm. When Harper approached, he straightened and offered a cautious smile. "Harper Collins." Her heart skipped. "How do you know my name?" He lifted his phone, showing her the video he'd recorded. Her humiliation, Lincoln's arrogance, Sienna's cruelty. It was all there in sharp detail. "I'm Ethan Brooks, investigative reporter for the Manhattan Ledger, and I think we're after the same man." Harper's breath caught. She should have felt exposed, maybe even embarrassed knowing her worst moment had been caught on camera. But instead, she felt something else. Relief. Someone had seen it all, not just the spectacle, but the truth. "I don't need pity," she said sharply, hugging herself tighter. "This isn't pity," Ethan replied. His voice was steady, calm. "This is evidence, and evidence is power." She stared at him, uncertain whether to trust. Her whole life had been a cycle of people underestimating her, mocking her, dismissing her. Why should this man be any different? "You don't even know me," Harper whispered. Ethan tilted his head. "I don't need to know you to recognize injustice when I see it." He slid the phone back into his pocket. "I've been following Lincoln Davis for months. That watch he flaunted tonight, it's not the first questionable thing tied to him. There's a trail, a dirty one, and your story might just blow it open." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to believe him, but the humiliation of the night still burned fresh. "So what, you want to use me? Publish my pain for clicks?" For the first time, Ethan's smile faded. His eyes softened, serious and unflinching. "I want to expose him, and I think you want your grandfather's watch back. We can help each other." What? The words hung in the air, trembling with possibility. Harper turned away, staring across the empty street. She thought of her grandfather, of the porch swing, of his gravelly voice urging her not to waste time. And then she thought of Lincoln's smirk, his cruel words, "You're a fly. Flies get swatted." Her jaw tightened. "What do you know about the watch?" she asked. Ethan opened his notebook, flipping through pages filled with scribbled notes, photos, and articles. He pulled one free, a grainy image from an auction catalog. There it was. The pocket watch listed under anonymous seller, purchased 6 months ago at a private estate auction. Buyer, undisclosed. "That's it," Harper whispered, her chest constricting. Ethan nodded. "I tracked the auction house. The sale wasn't clean. Lincoln used a shell company to purchase several items, including your watch. Items tied to questionable estates, missing documentation. Classic laundering move." Her head spun. "So he stole it?" "Not exactly. He exploited the system. He paid for it, technically. But the way he got his hands on it, illegal enough to matter. If we can prove it belonged to your family, we can corner him. He won't be able to hide behind money forever." Hope sparked faintly in Harper's chest. For the first time in years, she saw a path forward. But fear quickly followed. She imagined the weight of Lincoln's warning, his towering shadow, the venom in his voice. People who step into my world don't walk away unscathed. What if he comes after me? Harper asked, her voice trembling. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He will, then softer. But that's why you won't be alone. The words hit harder than she expected. She wasn't used to anyone standing beside her. Silence stretched between them, filled with the hum of distant traffic. Finally, Harper nodded. What do we do? Ethan's lips curved into a grim smile. We start digging. I'll handle the paper trail. He hesitated, then continued. You need to be brave enough to keep pushing, even when it gets ugly. Harper let out a shaky laugh. Bravery isn't my strong suit. Funny, Ethan said. I just watched you stand up to a billionaire in a room full of people who wanted you to stay small. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is. For the first time all night, Harper smiled. It was faint, fragile, but real. Ethan tucked his notebook back under his arm. I'll be in touch. For now, go home, rest. Tomorrow we start making noise. As he turned to leave, Harper called after him. Why are you doing this, really? He paused under the glow of the streetlight, his face shadowed. Because some stories deserve to be told, and some people deserve justice. I think you're both. He walked away, disappearing into the city. Harper stood frozen on the corner, her heart pounding. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. She pulled the $100 bills Lincoln had thrown at her from her apron pocket. Her fingers shook as she tore them in half, the sound sharp and final. Above her, the city lights flickered, as if New York itself were holding its breath. The cab disappeared into the stream of city traffic, carrying Harper and Ethan away from the dimly lit corner where their fragile alliance had begun. Harper clutched her grandfather's photo in her lap, her pulse racing with equal parts fear and determination. For the first time, she wasn't facing Lincoln alone. With Ethan beside her and evidence in hand, the impossible no longer felt unreachable. The watch could be reclaimed. The truth could be exposed. Yet as the neon lights flickered across the cab's windows, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that invisible eyes were following them. Somewhere out there, Lincoln Davis was watching, calculating, already plotting his next move. And when he struck back, she knew the cost would be far higher than humiliation. The next morning, Harper woke with a pounding headache. The events of last night replayed in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. Lincoln's smirk, Sienna's cruel laughter, the entire restaurant laughing at her pain. For a few precious seconds, as sunlight streamed through her tiny apartment window, she hoped it had all been a bad dream. But then her phone buzzed. A new message lit the screen. Dinner tonight. My driver will pick you up at 7. We'll talk about the watch. LD. Harper's heart skipped. She sat up, staring at the text as if it might vanish. Lincoln Davis, billionaire, untouchable, the man who humiliated her in front of Manhattan's elite, wanted to talk. Her stomach churned. It was too convenient, too sudden. Ethan's warning from the night before echoed in her head. He'll come after you. But what if? What if this was her chance? What if, for once, he was willing to make it right? Harper paced her small apartment, chewing her lip. She could already hear Ethan's voice telling her not to trust it. Yet something inside her wouldn't let go of the hope, the desperate hope, that maybe she could put this nightmare to rest and reclaim the last piece of her grandfather. At 7 sharp, a sleek black car pulled up to her building. The driver, expressionless in a cap and suit, opened the door without a word. Harper hesitated, then slid inside. The car wound its way through Manhattan's glittering streets before pulling up to a grand hotel ballroom. The sign outside read, Charity Gala for Children's Hospitals. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't dinner, this was a spectacle. The driver opened the door. Cameras flashed instantly. Paparazzi crowded the red carpet, shouting Lincoln's name. And there he was, tall, polished, in a perfectly cut tuxedo. Sienna clung to his arm, radiant in a gown that shimmered under the lights. Harper froze, panic seizing her chest, but before she could retreat, Lincoln spotted her. His smile widened. "Harper," he called, loud enough for every camera to hear. Heads turned. Photographers raised their lenses. Flashes exploded as Lincoln gestured for her to join him. She felt rooted to the spot, but his gaze was like a command. Slowly, reluctantly, Harper stepped forward. The cameras devoured her, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Who is she? Why is she here? Lincoln slipped an arm around her shoulders, the picture of benevolence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "this young woman has been through a lot. Last night she confronted me about this watch." He pulled it from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. Murmurs spread. Harper's chest tightened. Lincoln smiled at her, his eyes glinting with malice only she could see. "She believes it belonged to her grandfather." A touching story, isn't it? The reporters leaned in, microphones extended. Harper swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. "It's not just a story, it's the truth. That watch belonged to James Collins, my grandfather." The crowd buzzed louder. Lincoln chuckled softly, shaking his head like a patient teacher correcting a child. "Harper, Harper, I admire your conviction. Truly I do. But as I explained, I purchased this watch at a legitimate auction. And tonight, in the spirit of generosity, I'd like to put this matter to rest." He turned toward the cameras, holding the watch aloft. "I will donate this piece to the gala's silent auction. The proceeds will go to sick children who desperately need our help. Isn't that better than clinging to the past?" Applause erupted. Cameras flashed wildly. Reporters shouted questions praising his selfless act. Harper's stomach dropped, her vision blurred with rage and despair. He wasn't giving the watch back. He was erasing her claim, turning her family's legacy into a publicity stunt. "No," she cried, her voice cracking. "You can't do this. That watch doesn't belong in an auction, it belongs with my family." But the crowd didn't hear her pain. They only heard the narrative Lincoln spun, a billionaire donating priceless treasures to charity. Sienna smirked, her whisper sharp enough to cut. "Now you'll look like the girl who tried to take from sick kids. Congratulations, sweetheart, you've lost twice." Harper's knees buckled. The reporter's questions blurred into noise. Is she lying? Is she after money? Why ruin a charity event? Lincoln placed a comforting hand on her shoulder for the cameras. "It's all right," he said smoothly. "She's emotional, we forgive her." The humiliation was suffocating. In one move, he had destroyed her credibility, painted her as selfish, and stolen her voice. Harper's chest heaved. She stumbled back, tears burning her eyes. The watch was handed to the auctioneer, placed under glass, tagged with a bidding number. Her grandfather's legacy reduced to another trinket for the wealthy to fight over. She wanted to scream, to smash the glass, to take back what was hers, but she couldn't move. Every camera was trained on her, waiting for her to break. Finally, she turned and fled, pushing past the crowd, out into the night. She collapsed against the side of the hotel, gasping for air. The city lights blurred through her tears. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "I warned you. Are you all right? Meet me tomorrow morning. I found something about the auction." Her hands shook. She typed back with trembling fingers. "He's putting it in the gala auction. What do we do?" No response came. But a new message flashed almost immediately. Unknown number again. "You should have stayed silent. Last chance." Harper froze, her blood running cold. For the first time, she realized the truth. Lincoln wasn't just humiliating her. He was warning her, and the next step might not just ruin her reputation. It could ruin her life. Harper leaned against the cold stone wall outside the hotel, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. The glitter of the gala still burned in her eyes. The cameras, the applause, the cruel twist that had turned her grandfather's watch into a weapon against her. Lincoln had taken everything from her again, this time with the world cheering him on. Her phone buzzed in her palm. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, followed by the words, "Meet me tomorrow morning. I found something about the auction." Harper wiped at her face, swallowing back the tears. Lincoln had humiliated her, stripped her of dignity in front of strangers, but this wasn't the end. Somewhere in the mountain of lies he built, a crack had formed, and Ethan was ready to pry it open. Harper straightened her shoulders. She had lost the night, but the fight was far from over. The next morning, Harper arrived at a quiet coffee shop tucked away on the Lower East Side. It wasn't glamorous, just chipped mugs, peeling paint, and the hiss of an old espresso machine. But compared to the ballroom of humiliation she'd fled the night before, it felt like a sanctuary. Ethan Brooks was already there, seated in a corner booth with his laptop open and a pile of files spread out across the table. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his tie loosened. He looked like a man who hadn't slept all night, and judging by the empty coffee cups around him, he hadn't. When Harper slid into the booth, he looked up. His eyes were sharp, determined. "You all right?" She hesitated. Her face still burned with the memory of flashing cameras and Sienna's mocking voice. "No, but I'm still here." Ethan nodded, as if that answer alone proved something important. "Good, because I think I've found what we need." He turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a scanned document, a state auction record, Lot 47, pocket watch, brass, engraved JC. "That's it," Harper whispered, her chest tightening. "Yeah, it was listed 6 months ago," Ethan said. "But here's the catch. It wasn't supposed to be for sale. The estate it came from had no legal claim to it, which means Lincoln bought stolen property, and that's not all." He clicked to another document, bank transfers, wiring instructions, shell company records. The auction house was a front. Lincoln's people funneled money through 3 different offshore accounts to purchase not just your watch but several other high-value items, all linked to estates with, let's say, questionable paperwork. Harper blinked. "So he's laundering money." "Exactly." Ethan's voice was low but fierce. "Your grandfather's watch isn't just sentimental, it's evidence. It connects Lincoln to a chain of fraudulent transactions. If we can prove your family owned it originally, we can expose him." What? Her pulse quickened. For so long, the watch had been nothing more than a painful reminder of loss. Now it was something else, something powerful. She leaned forward, desperate. "How do we prove it?" Ethan flipped to another file, a faded black and white photograph. Her throat caught. It was her grandfather, younger, standing proudly in front of the family's old house. And there, tucked into his vest pocket, was the faint outline of the watch chain. "This came from public archives," Ethan explained. "Your grandfather worked for the city in the 1960s. Someone snapped this photo for a local newspaper article. That chain, it matches the auction watch exactly. Same clasp, same length. If we line this up with the engravings inside, it's irrefutable proof." Harper's eyes stung. She touched the photo with trembling fingers, her chest aching with both grief and hope. "Grandpa." Ethan watched her quietly, giving her space. Then he said, "Harper, this is bigger than you or me. If we go public with this, we're not just getting the watch back. We're taking Lincoln down." Her stomach twisted. She remembered the black car idling outside her building last night, the threatening text, "Stop asking questions." Lincoln wasn't playing games anymore. "What if he comes after me?" she asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then he'll have to go through me too. But listen, you already stood up to him once. That took guts. Now we use what he hates most, truth, and we make sure the world sees it." Harper swallowed hard. Her fear was real, but so was her anger. So was her resolve. "Let's do it." Ethan leaned back, exhaling like a man carrying the weight of 10 storms. "All right, Tonight there's another gala. Lincoln will be there, so will the press. We'll leak the documents, the photo, everything. By the time he steps on stage, the story will already be out. Her breath caught. Tonight. Tonight, Ethan confirmed. Strike fast before he can bury the evidence. Harper's hands shook, but she clenched them into fists. She thought of her grandfather, of his voice urging her to make every second count. This was her second. This was her chance. Ethan gathered the files, sliding them into his leather satchel. He paused, his eyes locking on hers. One more thing. Once we do this, there's no going back. Lincoln doesn't forgive and he doesn't forget. Are you ready for that? Harper hesitated, her throat tight. But then she remembered the laughter in Le Jardin Rouge, the way he tossed money at her feet like she was trash. She remembered the watch under glass, reduced to a trophy for the wealthy. Yes, she said firmly, I'm ready. Ethan's lips curved into a grim smile. Good. Then tonight we make history. They left the coffee shop together, stepping into the noisy Manhattan streets. For the first time in years, Harper didn't feel invisible. She felt alive. But as they walked, Harper noticed a man across the street. He wore a dark suit, no tie, sunglasses even though the day was overcast. He wasn't looking at the traffic. He was looking at them. Her stomach dropped. Ethan, she whispered, tugging his arm. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Keep walking, he murmured. Don't let him see you're scared. They crossed the street, the man's eyes following. Harper's pulse hammered. Every step felt like a countdown. Finally, Ethan flagged down a cab. They climbed inside, slamming the door shut. Harper glanced back through the rear window. The suited man was still standing there, watching as the cab pulled away. Her phone buzzed. Another text, this time with a photo. It was the picture Ethan had just shown her grandfather, the watch chain visible. Except now it had been taken from Ethan's files. The message read, "Nice try, you won't win." Harper's blood ran cold. Lincoln knew about the evidence. She turned to Ethan, her voice trembling. He's already one step ahead. Ethan's jaw set. Then we have to be too. The cab rumbled through Manhattan's endless streets, neon lights flashing against the windows. Harper held the old photograph tight in her hands, her grandfather's faint smile staring back at her through time. Proof. Real proof. For the first time, the truth was no longer just a memory locked in her heart. It was evidence strong enough to bring Lincoln Davis down. Beside her, Ethan tapped furiously at his phone, lining up leaks, preparing the storm that would break over Lincoln's empire. By tonight, he said, the world will know everything. Harper pressed the photograph to her chest, her pulse quickening. The thought of facing Lincoln again terrified her, but the fear no longer paralyzed her. This time, she would walk into the fire with her head high. And somewhere across the city, Lincoln was already bracing for the blow, ready to turn the battlefield into a spectacle of power. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel glowed like a beacon that night. Its marble steps rolled out into a red carpet lined with cameras and velvet ropes. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, golden drapes, and the hum of Manhattan's most powerful voices. It was Lincoln Davis's world, the place where he thrived, where he ruled. But tonight, Harper Collins was going to shatter it. She stood just inside the entrance, her palms damp, her chest tight with nerves. Ethan stood at her side, his satchel slung over his shoulder. Inside were the documents, the photo of her grandfather, the auction records, the truth. Remember, Ethan whispered, his voice low but steady. Once the story goes live, there's no undoing it. He'll try to bury you, smear you, maybe worse. But the world will see him for what he is. Harper's throat tightened. She thought of her grandfather's watch under glass, reduced to a prize for the wealthy. She thought of Lincoln's voice calling her a fly to be swatted. Her fear hardened into resolve. "I'm ready," she whispered. They stepped into the ballroom. The sight was dazzling. champagne towers glimmering, violins filling the air with music, servers weaving through the crowd. At the far end, a stage gleamed beneath the lights, a podium waiting for Lincoln Davis. And there he was, center of the room, surrounded by investors, politicians, celebrities. Tall, flawless in his tuxedo, radiating confidence. Sienna clung to his arm, draped in a gown of silver sequins, smiling like she owned the night. The sight made Harper's stomach turn. Lincoln glanced up and saw her. For a moment his expression flickered, surprise breaking through his polished mask. Then the smirk returned. He leaned down, murmured something to Sienna, and began making his way toward the stage. "Here we go," Ethan muttered. As Lincoln reached the podium, the lights dimmed slightly and the crowd hushed. Cameras turned. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for the billionaire's speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lincoln began, his voice smooth as silk, "tonight we gather not just to celebrate wealth but to share it, to give back to the children who need it most." He spread his arms wide, basking in the applause. Harper's fists clenched. The hypocrisy made her skin crawl. Lincoln continued, his smile sharp. "And as a symbol of generosity, tonight I am donating one of my personal treasures to the cause." The auctioneer stepped forward, lifting the glass case. Inside, the watch, her grandfather's watch. The crowd gasped in admiration. Harper's heart hammered. This was it. Ethan gave her a subtle nod. And then, before she could second-guess, Harper stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence. "That watch isn't yours to give." The room froze. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. Lincoln's smile stiffened. "Excuse me," he asked, feigning surprise. Harper's voice shook at first, but she steadied it. "That watch belonged to my grandfather, James Collins. You stole it through a sham auction, and I can prove it." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Sienna laughed sharply, her voice echoing. "Not this again, security." "Wait," Lincoln interrupted smoothly, lifting a hand. He smiled down at Harper, the picture of control. "Let's hear her out. After all, we wouldn't want to silence someone with such conviction." The crowd leaned in, hungry for drama. Harper's hands trembled, but Ethan stepped up beside her, pulling out his satchel. "We have the auction records," he announced. "Proof that the estate had no legal right to sell the watch. Proof of Lincoln's shell companies funneling money offshore to buy stolen property." He handed a stack of documents to the nearest reporter. Cameras clicked wildly. Murmurs. Lincoln's jaw tightened, but his smile didn't falter. "Baseless accusations," he said smoothly. "Fabrications from a desperate girl and a washed-up journalist." Ethan bristled, but Harper stepped forward. She pulled out the faded photograph, the one of her grandfather with the watch chain visible. She held it high, her voice raw. "This isn't just paperwork. This is my family. My grandfather wore that watch every day of his life. He left it to us, and Lincoln Davis stole it to make himself richer." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed like lightning. Investors shifted uncomfortably, murmuring to one another. Lincoln's smile finally cracked. He slammed a hand on the podium. "Enough. This is a charity event, not a circus." But his voice had lost its calm. Harper's eyes burned with tears, but her voice rang clear. "This isn't just about a watch. This is about power. About people like you thinking you can take whatever you want and crush whoever gets in your way. Well, not anymore." The ballroom roared with voices, some supportive, some skeptical. Sienna tugged at Lincoln's arm, hissing, "Do something." Lincoln straightened, his mask slipping back into place. "You think a photo and a few forged documents can touch me? You're nothing, Harper Collins, and you always will be." Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down, then looked up, eyes blazing. "Not nothing, it's already live." On the giant screens flanking the ballroom, headlines flashed. "Expose. Lincoln Davis tied to auction laundering scheme." The documents, the photo, the trail of money, all published by the Manhattan Ledger. Gasps turned to chaos. Reporters scrambled for details, phones rang, investors backed away from Lincoln as if he were contagious. Harper's chest heaved. For the first time she saw it, the cracks in his armor, the smirk faltering, the charm evaporating, the predator cornered. "You," Lincoln seethed, pointing at Ethan. "You'll pay for this." Ethan didn't flinch. "No, you will." The ballroom exploded into frenzy. Security rushed forward, reporters shouted, cameras swarmed. Through the chaos, Harper locked eyes with Lincoln. For years he had stood untouchable, towering over people like her. But tonight he looked smaller, human, afraid. Her voice was steady, clear. "This is just the beginning." The ballroom erupted into chaos, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, security pressing through the crowd. Lincoln's mask of control had cracked at last. His polished veneer stripped away under the weight of truth beamed across giant screens. Harper stood at the center of it all, her chest heaving, the photograph of her grandfather burning in her hand like a torch. For years she had been invisible, powerless. But tonight the world had seen her, and it had seen him fall. Yet even as security closed in, she caught sight of Sienna slipping out the side doors, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, her expression sharp and calculating. Harper's victory wasn't the end of the story. Lincoln Davis might be bleeding, but the empire around him was still alive, still dangerous. The real collapse was yet to come. The headlines spread like wildfire. By dawn, every major news outlet was carrying the story. Lincoln Davis exposed in auction laundering scandal. Stock tickers scrolled red across the bottom of television screens. Investors flooded out, his company's valuation plunging by billions before the markets even opened. Harper sat in her small apartment, clutching a chipped mug of coffee, watching it unfold on the TV. For once, the laughter she remembered from the restaurant wasn't aimed at her. It was aimed at him. This morning, sources confirmed federal investigators are reviewing financial ties between Davis and multiple offshore accounts, a reporter said briskly. Calls for his resignation are mounting, and some insiders predict criminal charges could follow. Harper set the mug down, her hands trembling. She had imagined this moment, dreamed of it even, but living it felt surreal. The man who once sneered that she was a fly was now the one being swatted down by the world. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. "Meet me at the Ledger office. You'll want to see this." By the time Harper arrived, the newsroom was buzzing like a hornet's nest. Phones rang non-stop, reporters shouted over each other, screens lit up with updates every second. Ethan waved her over, his expression a mix of exhaustion and triumph. "They want an interview with you," he said, gesturing to a producer waiting nearby. "You don't have to, but people want to hear your story." Harper froze, her story. Not just Lincoln's crimes, but her pain, her humiliation, her fight. Did she dare bear it all? She shook her head. "Not yet, this isn't about me, it's about stopping him." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough, but I think you should see this." He pulled up a live feed on his laptop. Lincoln, stepping out of his skyscraper office, was immediately swarmed by reporters. Cameras shoved in his face, microphones thrust at his mouth. "Mr. Davis, did you knowingly buy stolen property? Are you facing indictment? Is it true your mistress has already left you?" Lincoln's once flawless composure was cracking. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, sweat beaded on his temple. Sienna trailed a few steps behind, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering urgently. And then, in front of the cameras, she stopped. "Lincoln," she said loudly enough for the microphones to catch, "we're done." Every reporter turned, stunned. Lincoln spun around, his face pale. "Sienna, don't." But she was already slipping off the glittering bracelet he had given her, dropping it into a reporter's hand with a dramatic flair. "You think you own people the way you collect toys. Well, not me. Enjoy your fall. She walked away, her heels clicking like gunshots on the pavement, her figure swallowed by the crowd. Went wild. Headlines updated instantly. Sienna Moore abandons Davis amid scandal. Harper stared at the screen, her chest tight. For the first time, Lincoln looked small, alone. Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. That's what happens when you build an empire on fear. The moment you stumble, everyone you thought was loyal runs. Harper thought of the watch, still trapped under glass at the gala. What happens to it now? She whispered. Ethan's lips curved into a smile. Funny you should ask. Hours later, Harper found herself back at the Grand Metropolitan. The gala had ended in chaos, the ballroom now eerily quiet. A few staffers moved about, cleaning up the wreckage of toppled champagne flutes and scattered programs. At the far end of the room, the auction table remained. The glass case that had held the watch sat empty, the tag still taped to the surface. Her breath caught. It's gone. Not gone, Ethan said softly, reaching into his satchel. He pulled something out wrapped carefully in cloth. Recovered. He unfolded it slowly. The watch. Her grandfather's watch. Warm brass glinting under the chandelier light. Initials JC etched faintly inside the case. Harper gasped. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, cradling it like something fragile, something holy. Tears blurred her vision. I don't understand, she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. When the gala went up in flames last night, security handed everything over to the investigators. One of my contacts pulled this aside before it disappeared into evidence limbo. It belongs with you. Her throat closed. She traced her finger over the cracked glass, the familiar scratches, the chain worn smooth by decades of use. Memories crashed over her, her grandfather winding it at the porch, her father's voice promising it would always stay in the family. It's home, she whispered through tears. Ethan rested a hand gently on her shoulder. It's more than home, it's proof. The kind of proof that makes sure Lincoln Davis never climbs back up. Harper pressed the watch to her chest, sobbing quietly. For years she had carried only grief and anger. Now, for the first time, she felt something else, peace. But the peace didn't last. As they left the ballroom, Ethan's phone buzzed again. He checked it, his expression hardening. What is it? Harper asked, still clutching the watch. He handed her the phone. The message was anonymous, the same number that had sent threats before. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last. Lincoln isn't finished. Harper's stomach dropped. She glanced at Ethan, fear creeping back in. He's cornered, Ethan said firmly. And cornered men are dangerous. But that also means he's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Harper tightened her grip on the watch. She wasn't the same woman who had been humiliated in front of strangers at Le Jardin Rouge. She wasn't powerless anymore. Then let him make mistakes, she said quietly. This time I'll be ready. Outside, the city roared with sirens and flashing lights. News vans lined the street, reporters shouting updates into cameras. The Titan had begun to fall, but the fight wasn't finished. Harper stepped out of the Grand Metropolitan with the watch cradled in her palms, the brass warm against her skin. For the first time in years, it wasn't just a memory, it was hers again. She pressed it to her chest, whispering to the night that her grandfather's legacy had finally come home. Beside her, Ethan smiled, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning the busy street where news vans blared headlines of Lincoln's downfall. The Titan's empire was collapsing, but both of them knew men like Lincoln didn't surrender quietly. As Harper drew a steady breath, vowing she would never be broken again, the rumble of an SUV passed by, slow and deliberate. Through the tinted glass, a pair of cold eyes lingered on her, eyes that promised the fight was not yet finished. Harper tightened her grip on the watch. The battle for justice had been won, but the war for survival was only just beginning. Lincoln Davis had always believed he was invincible, the kind of man who could bend the world to his will with a smile and a wire transfer. But now, the world was bending the other way, and it was crushing him. The morning news played like an obituary for his empire. Anchors listed one collapse after another, stock values plummeting, government contracts suspended, banks freezing accounts. Shareholders were demanding his resignation. Board members who once begged for his approval were now sharpening their knives. In the penthouse of his Manhattan skyscraper, Lincoln sat alone at a massive glass table. The city stretched beneath him, but for the first time it looked less like his kingdom and more like a cage. His phone buzzed constantly, calls from lawyers, texts from executives, messages he ignored. He poured himself a drink instead, the amber liquid trembling in the glass. His reflection stared back at him from the window, the polished billionaire who had once owned the night. Now, there was something else in the glassy surface, something hollow, desperate. Sienna's betrayal replayed in his mind like a cruel joke, her heels clacking as she walked away. Her words, "You think you own people like toys, not me." He clenched his jaw, slamming the glass onto the table so hard it cracked. The door opened. His lawyer, a man in a tailored navy suit, stepped in with a stack of papers. "The Justice Department is preparing charges. Money laundering, fraud, possibly conspiracy." Lincoln didn't look up. "Fix it." The lawyer hesitated. "I can't. They've got evidence, testimony, documents." "Fix it," Lincoln roared, slamming his fist against the table. The crack in the glass spread like a spider web. The lawyer's face remained cold, professional. "You don't pay me enough to do the impossible. You should consider cooperating." Lincoln's head snapped up. "Cooperating?" "Yes. Plead guilty to lesser charges. You'll serve time, but maybe you'll walk out before you're 60. For a long moment, Lincoln just stared. Then he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Do you know who I am? I don't beg, I don't bargain, I win." The lawyer sighed, setting the papers down. "Not anymore, not this time." And with that, he walked out, leaving Lincoln alone with the silence. Across the city, Harper sat on her small couch, the watch cradled in her hands. She turned it over gently, her thumb brushing the initials JC. Every tick felt like a heartbeat, grounding her. For so long she had been defined by loss, humiliation, fear. But now the weight on her chest was lighter. Ethan sat across from her, sipping coffee. They're closing in on him fast. Federal agents could move within the week. Harper nodded slowly. She should have felt triumphant. She had wanted this, his downfall, his humiliation. But instead, she felt something more complicated. "I thought I'd be happy," she admitted softly, "watching him lose everything. But now," she shook her head, "I don't know, it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the way he made me feel." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. "Justice doesn't erase pain, but it does make sure he can't do it again. That matters." She looked down at the watch, at the scratches her grandfather's hands had left behind. Maybe Ethan was right. But she also knew Lincoln wasn't finished. Not yet. And she was right. That night, Lincoln appeared on television, sitting in a dimly lit studio across from a sympathetic host. He looked thinner, his eyes shadowed, but he wore his best suit and his most practiced smile. "This is a witch hunt," he declared. "A smear campaign orchestrated by people jealous of my success. A waitress and a second-rate journalist want to destroy me. I built an empire. I created jobs, innovations, futures. And this is how they repay me." Harper watched the broadcast from her apartment, her stomach twisting. "He's lying," she whispered. "Of course he is," Ethan said. "It's what he does. But the evidence is stronger than any soundbite. He can't talk his way out this time." Still, Harper couldn't shake the unease. Lincoln's voice carried a dangerous edge, a promise that he wasn't going down without taking someone with him. 2 days later, that promise sharpened. Harper returned home to find her apartment door ajar. Her pulse spiked. She stepped inside cautiously, her heart hammering. The place was untouched, almost. The table where she kept the watch was empty. Her breath caught. No. She tore through the apartment, searching frantically, but the watch was gone. Her grandfather's legacy, her proof, her victory, stolen again. On the kitchen counter sat a note, scrawled in bold ink. You can take everything from me, but I'll take it back piece by piece. LD. Harper's knees buckled. Rage surged through her, white-hot. Ethan arrived minutes later, his face grim as he read the note. He's desperate. Cornered animals bite hardest. Harper clenched her fists, her tears burning. He wants me broken. He thinks if he steals it again, I'll give up. Ethan's jaw tightened. So we don't give him the satisfaction, we get it back. Harper looked out the window, the city lights blurring. For the first time, she understood that this fight wasn't just about her grandfather's watch anymore. It was about refusing to let Lincoln Davis own her pain. The empire he built was collapsing around him. Friends gone, lawyers gone, the public turning on him. But Lincoln still had one thing left, spite, and he was using it like a weapon. Harper stood at her window, the city lights flickering like restless stars beyond the glass. In her hand, the note Lincoln had left still shook with the weight of his final threat. He had lost his empire, his allies, even his freedom, but he still clung to spite like it was the only weapon he had left. She tightened her jaw, her pulse steadying. For so long she had lived in fear of him, but fear was no longer her master. Lincoln Davis was finished, whether he admitted it or not. His end was inevitable. And as Harper whispered to herself that she would carry her grandfather's legacy forward, she knew the next chapter was no longer about fighting Lincoln. It was about building something he could never touch. The story of her family's watch was closing, and another, brighter, was ready to begin. The city never slept, but for once, Lincoln Davis's penthouse was silent. The curtains were drawn, the lights dimmed. The titan who once commanded boardrooms and black-tie galas now sat alone on the edge of his bed, hunched over, clutching a single object. The watch. His fingers dug into the brass casing, his knuckles white. It no longer gleamed in the way it had under the chandeliers. It looked small, old, fragile. But Lincoln clung to it as if it could anchor him against the storm outside. On the television across the room, the news played relentlessly. Federal indictment issued for Lincoln Davis. His face, once celebrated, now plastered across screens as the face of scandal. His empire had crumbled. His friends had vanished. Even Sienna had left him to rot. The knock on the door was soft but firm. Before he could respond, federal agents stepped in, suits crisp, voices cold. Mr. Davis, you're under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Lincoln's jaw clenched. He tightened his grip on the watch. For one reckless second, he thought about running, about fighting. But then the weight of it all crashed down. His shoulders slumped. He let the agents cuff his wrists, the cold steel biting his skin. The watch slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. For the first time in his life, Lincoln Davis didn't reach to pick something up. Across the city, Harper Collins stood at a small podium in a modest hall filled with students, teachers, and community members. The space wasn't glamorous, folding chairs, donated flowers, coffee, and styrofoam cups. But to Harper, it felt grander than any ballroom. Behind her, a banner read, "The Collins Scholarship Fund honoring James Collins." She took a shaky breath, looking down at the notes in her hand. Her reflection stared back from the polished surface of the podium, not a waitress trembling under the mockery of the wealthy, not a victim hiding in shame, but a woman who had survived and stood tall. She lifted her eyes to the crowd. My grandfather used to tell me, every second counts. He carried a watch to remind him of that. When I was a little girl, he gave it to my father, who gave it to me. It was more than just an object. It was a piece of our family, our story, our reminder to never waste the time we're given. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. That watch was stolen from us, and for years I thought I had lost it forever. But what I really lost was something deeper, my faith that the world could be fair. That truth could matter. The room was silent, every eye on her. Then I learned that sometimes to take back what was stolen, you have to stand up, even when you're scared, even when people laugh at you, even when you feel alone. Her throat tightened. But I wasn't alone, and because of that the watch came home, and with it so did hope. Applause rippled through the hall, soft at first, then stronger. Harper reached into the glass case beside her and carefully lifted the watch. The brass glowed faintly under the overhead lights, polished now but still bearing its familiar scratches, its crack in the glass. This watch no longer belongs only to me. It belongs to all of us, to every student here who wonders if they'll get their chance, to every family who works hard and still feels invisible. The Collins Scholarship Fund will make sure you do, because every second counts and every dream matters. Tears welled in her eyes as she fastened the watch back into its case, now set not on a billionaire's vest, not on an auctioneer's table, but in a place where it could inspire. The applause rose louder, people standing, clapping until the room shook with it. Harper smiled through her tears, her heart lighter than it had ever been. From the back of the hall, Ethan watched quietly, his arms crossed, pride shining in his eyes. When the crowd surged forward to congratulate Harper, he slipped out, giving her the spotlight she deserved. Later that night, Harper found him waiting outside under the glow of a street lamp. She smiled, still breathless from the evening. "You should have stayed," she said softly. "This was your victory, too." What? Ethan shook his head. "No, this was always yours. I just helped you find the microphone." She laughed, wiping at her eyes. For once, the laughter wasn't bitter. It was free. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged lightly, "Just doing my job." Then his gaze softened. "But I'm glad I did it for you." They stood in silence for a moment, the city buzzing around them, headlights streaking by, the smell of roasted chestnuts drifting from a vendor's cart. Harper exhaled. For years she had carried grief like a shadow. Tonight it felt like the shadow had finally lifted. She reached into her bag, pulling out the watch once more. Holding it against her chest, she whispered into the night. "Grandpa, your timepiece isn't just ticking again. It's keeping time for others now." The words lingered in the air, soft but strong. And for the first time, Harper felt the world answer back. Not with laughter or cruelty, but with the steady, reassuring tick of hope. Meanwhile, in a prison intake cell, Lincoln Davis sat on a metal bench, his once perfect suit rumpled, his tie discarded. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He stared at the blank wall in front of him, eyes hollow. There were no cameras now, no microphones, no admirers, no Sienna, no empire. The man who once believed he could own time itself had finally run out of it. And somewhere far from his cell, the legacy he tried to steal was alive, ticking on. The applause slowly faded, replaced by the quiet hum of voices and footsteps as the crowd trickled out of the hall. Harper stayed behind, standing alone before the glass case where her grandfather's watch now rested, not as a trophy of greed, but as a beacon of hope. The scholarship fund had been launched, the students' faces alive with possibility, and for the first time in years, Harper felt weightless. She traced the glass with her fingertips, imagining her grandfather's hand steadying hers the way he once did. Behind her, the city pulsed with its usual chaos, cars, sirens, endless movement. But inside, Harper felt still, safe, whole. The watch ticked softly, steady and sure, carrying time forward not for the powerful who tried to steal it, but for the dreamers who needed it most. Harper smiled through her tears. The story of loss and humiliation had finally become a story of justice, resilience, and healing. And with that, she stepped away from the case, walking into the night with her head held high, ready for the future that was waiting.